No, I'm going to take that back. I'm not going to say what else can we piss on. That doesn't seem appropriate.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to What the Trans.
What the Trans. How are we all?
Doing well. Pretty tired. I was in London for the last little while, so I've still been crocheting. I've still been crafting. It's been nice.
Nice.
But yeah, I was in London for a little bit, and I'm missing my boy, my dog. So I'm back home now, and I'm enjoying it. Vibing.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Giving you an early morning as well, from what I heard.
Yeah, he woke up this morning at like 6:30, just kind of barking.
Oof.
Yeah, and he very rarely barks. Like, he never barks. So I knew something was wrong, and he just needed to go outside. That was my wake up this morning. But it's my friend's birthday tomorrow, so I'm gonna be seeing them later today and tomorrow. So that'll be a good time. They're coming over.
I don't know what's going up north.
Yeah, because it's your birthday too, isn't it?
It's my birthday tomorrow as well.
It is, yeah. Fun times. Have you got anything interesting planned, or are you just going to chill out for it?
I wish I could say it was chilled out, but I've got to be dragged out of bed at some point. And, well, to be fair, I would say it's quite a nice one, though, because I'm off to the Royal Albert Hall to see the Cirque du Soleil again. I think I
Nice.
mentioned it.
Yeah, you spoke about it last time. Very cool.
The new show, so I was like, you know what, why not? Let's give it another go.
Well, on the subject of shows, I think I've got that beat because I went to see a Pink Floyd tribute band.
Ooh. Were they Pinkish Floyd?
They were Brit Floyd.
Brit Floyd. Okay.
Brit. Yeah,
Slight bit of patriotism added.
Yeah. Well, because one of the big Pink Floyd tribute bands, to the extent I saw them at the MEN Arena like 20 years ago, is the Australian Pink Floyd show. And so where there's an animal featured in Pink Floyd, like, you know, the inflatable pig off the cover of Animals or whatever, it's a kangaroo.
Amazing.
So there's always a kangaroo somewhere in the artwork. So Brit Floyd presumably rose as, hey, you know, let's have some homegrown covering of Pink Floyd songs. But it was just fucking wonderful, because obviously it's not just about the music, which I'm intimately familiar with, but like the lasers, the light show, the haze, the projections, and all that kind of audio-visual stuff was just amazing. And I wish I'd had some like edibles beforehand.
No, exactly. I saw on your Instagram, the
Yes.
visuals looked brilliant.
Yes. Oh yeah. So many lasers. And they played like several songs that you might not have expected, but that I loved them for doing. Like they did Empty Spaces into What Shall We Do Now, which was cut off the main version of The Wall because it was too long. But it's in the film and it's on the live album of The Wall. Is There Anybody Out There? Which for years I thought I'd hallucinated that album because I couldn't find it on streaming. I couldn't find it on YouTube. But it turns out it is real. I have it on my hard drive, and now I have it on mini disc.
Yes.
Yes, that one that you got recently.
Yep. Because I am all about cutting edge technology and music, the very music that is definitely of the current moment with my mini disc and Pink Floyd. So yeah, that's me. You can tell I've hit 40.
Yeah, just get rid of that discounted technology label Spotify.
You know what though? I kind of relate somewhat there because I as much as I've spoken a lot about really loving rave music and ridiculous extremities of sound, I also really, really enjoy a good bit of dad rock. And I used to listen to a lot of just like really old school like blues and rock and stuff like that. And I came across recently in Newcastle, as we were going on the way in for a comedy gig, actually, seeing a comedian, Ori Styler. We had to go past a little music shop, and I had like a full double take moment when I walked past the window because I saw, for the first time in my life, a physical vinyl of Rory Gallagher, who's one of my like all-time favorite blues musicians. I will info dump about him for 5 minutes if I'm given the opportunity, so I won't do that now.
Thank you.
He's very, very, very cool person. And my dad got me into his music when I was probably about 11 or 12. I've never seen anything beyond, I think, a beaten up CD that my dad had. Everything else has been through downloads or whatever. But it was, not only was it a vinyl collection, it was also 2 Blu-rays, and it had over like 120 something tracks, like unreleased music. And I was like, this is like the vault. This is like the Beatles anthology, but like for Rory Gallagher, and it was too much
Shut up
money.
and take my money.
It was very much that, but alas, I had none. So I just cried about it. Yeah.
On the way to a comedy gig. Yeah, well, hopefully that cheered you up.
It really did, actually. It was a really funny time.
Awesome. Speaking of really funny times, let's not have one of those. Because this is What the Trans and we do the news. But first, before we do the news, let's talk about things that you can do. Because a lot of the news can be quite heavy. Unfortunately, that is the case for this episode. So let's talk about some concrete actions that you can take and encourage your friends, and especially your cis friends, to take in defence of trans people.
So, first up, we have a petition calling for NHS policy to remain trans-inclusive in the face of rumoured reviews regarding the policies for single-sex wards. The NHS Constitution is required to get a review, or check-up, if you will, every 10 years, with the most recent one being initiated by the Tory government in 2024. We can't exactly trust them to set the ball rolling in the good direction, so definitely go and sign it. At the time of writing, the petition already has over 13,000 signatures. Having passed 10k, we have a rather long and drab official response. Though being told this guidance is currently under review hardly inspires confidence, so we'll provide a link to the petition so you can read the full response and sign for yourselves below. The more the merrier.
So speaking of petitions, the Good Law Project has also put up a letter writing campaign to Sky to pull any kind of advertisements for GB News, following some really shitty comments by some presenters on GB News, basically saying that paedophiles are part of the LGBTQ community. It's just shitty. We're going to link that in the description below, so feel free to pop your own signature there to show that we don't want any hate in the news.
Yeah, and so this petition is related to a complaint to Ofcom, which I think, I signed myself. So I sent Ofcom an email saying, look, this is bullshit. You can't have them just broadcasting hate. But Sky have taken advertising space on GB News. So this campaign is specifically saying to Sky, oi, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, good.
Couldn't put it better myself.
And we also have a little notice board section, briefly, because we've got 2 pretty amazing articles that have come out this week on the What the Trans website, and, well, we wanted to shout them out, just in case you haven't come across them. So, firstly, the amazing Reactive Ashleigh has written for us, going into her recent Freedom of Information requests, that show the paper trail of the CAS review, or lack thereof. Look at the article for the full tea, but here is a sip. Either some important information is missing in action, or it's been destroyed, which is pretty illegal. And then, secondly, we have our very own Alyx, who has uncovered systemic intimidation inside of the Tavistock GIDS clinic, which is equal parts horrid and unsurprising, but don't let that stop you from digging into the full details. What was it like writing such a banger?
You know, I like to dip my toes in a small bit of investigative journalism on the odd occasion.
Yeah, it's a really good article. Nice work. So both of those are worth reading. A large part of what we do does go on the website, so please do keep an eye on that.
And now we're on to the news.
We are indeed on to the news. So,
Womp womp.
I want to start with something that seems like a negative, but I want to try and undermine it slightly, so it's not as bad as it might initially appear. Now, you might have seen this week that there was a YouGov poll about trans people, and it apparently looks like anti-trans sentiment is on the rise here in the UK. So, as I said, I'm going to start by giving you the bad news first, but as I've said, all is not lost. I'll do my best to take it apart right afterwards. Right then, the bad stuff. I'm going to give you a bunch of stats, but don't worry if you're only half listening while doing something else. The numbers themselves aren't actually all that important for reasons we'll get to later. Plus, I'll be throwing out some comparisons with the last time YouGov ran this same survey, which was back in 2022. So according to this one survey, the percentage of people who think that trans people shouldn't be allowed to even socially transition has gone up 10 percentage points from 25% in 2022 to 35% in 2024, compared to 49% of people who believe we should be able to, but even that stance itself is down from 55% from a couple of years ago. When it comes to if we should be able to legally change our gender, we have 34% saying we should and 49% saying we shouldn't, so thanks for that. But again, we see the more permissive stance having gone down from 40% in 22, and the oppositional stance has gone up from 37. So that's a rise of 11 percentage points. Unfortunately, we do see this same trend reflected in each of the different stats when broken down by age, range, and gender, and so on. Even in the places you'd expect to see a consistent rise, like among younger people and among women, these have gone down too. For example, in 2022, 44% of women supported allowing people to legally change their gender, but in the newer stats, that figure has fallen to 37%. The same question about approval for legal gender changes had dropped by 7 percentage points among those aged 18 to 24. And on it goes, right? Support for trans men using the men's bathroom has fallen. Support for use of puberty blockers in those under 16 has fallen. Support for trans people in sport has fallen. And in particular, people were less supportive of trans women in women's sports than they were of trans men in men's sports. Funny that. How could that have possibly happened? But, right, the crux of it is, the thing is with this survey, obviously, in one sense, it's not surprising, given that we're deep into a years-long anti-trans crusade by governments and media companies. But the main thing that I want you to take away from this is that this survey was done on a mere 2,000 people. Out of every one of the millions here in Britain, they invited these 2,000 people to fill in a survey. I don't think this is particularly representative. And again, this wasn't a survey that went out widely on the YouGov website. It was one that people had to be invited to fill in. So who was chosen to be invited, and by what metric was that decided? In all, about 600 people were fully supportive of trans people, and about 600 people were at the most gender fascistic possible level and said trans people shouldn't be permitted to change gender either socially or legally, and that doesn't seem right to me. We have more support than we think. And there's one other thing I want to clear up too. There was a rumour going around that this survey had been commissioned by Sex Matters, and the reason the outcome was more negative was that they'd shared it among their own members, which then weighted the results to their recalcitrant perspective. This was just a rumour, it's not true. Sex Matters had nothing to do with commissioning this survey. It was part of a YouGov series of polls that goes all the way back to 2018. So, yeah, it's just one poll, and polls... You know, there's that old phrase, lies, damned lies, and statistics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, like, YouGov polls they seem to be the performance of a social science a lot of the time for me.
Yes.
It's because the second that it's, you know, invite only and things like that, they're really curating. That's not to say that there's no integrity there. That's not to say that it's not done with the aim of getting a vague understanding of where people are at. I don't trust YouGov polls that much because of the level of like invite and whatnot, and because polls in general are pretty unreliable. So, you know, what a surprise that, you know, people who would be a part of the YouGov poll system might have some slightly more than average anti-trans views. That doesn't surprise me. It just indicates that they're people that read a lot of the current news cycle. Like, that's it.
So basically, I think YouGov was originally founded by Nadhim Zahawi, a cabinet member in Boris Johnson's government, Liz Truss's, and so on. There was like a whole big protest at Warwick Uni ages ago for his role in launching the original schools guidance outing trans kids to parents.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Because I remember speaking to the protesters of that and going up too soon. This was back in 2022, so it's me casting my mind back a long way.
Basically, this poll is not meaningless completely, but kind of meaningless adjacent.
Yeah.
Because it's just a fucking poll, and I don't think it's particularly representative, really. Because almost everybody you meet is like, well, live and let live. Yes, there's some dickheads around. There's always some dickheads around.
Yeah. It's less of a stink bomb and more of a fart in an elevator.
Yeah.
And now we move our eye over the pond to the US, where the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention has placed a red flag alert for the anti-trans agenda for the Trump administration. One that has since been deleted, but we'll get into the why in a bit. In this statement on the 14th of February, the Lemkin Institute states that they condemn the anti-trans agenda of the second Trump administration and that it is meant to pave the way for greater state repression against all individuals and other groups in the future. It then says, to trans Americans, we send our solidarity and support, and the usual sort of thing. However, quite concerningly, this statement then went on to say that in their specific obsession of trans women, these initiatives also exhibit a clear misandry or hatred of men. With that wording, it essentially calls trans women men, the same transphobia that they are claiming to oppose. The mistake isn't great, but it's easy to correct by just removing that sentence and a little bit rewording. Fair enough. But no. The Lemkin Institute then labels any of the corrections people are advising on rewording the statement left-on-left violence and decides to leave Blue Sky altogether. And in some weird retaliation that really gives us red flags, it deletes the red flag. Later, we also find out that the statement wasn't written or edited by anyone who was trans before it was published. When you're trying to engage with a community and come to their support, you need to listen to them. Doubling down and attacking them for your own mistake is not how it's done. They've said they'll be rewriting the statement, but given what was on it, and there will be a bitter taste, as the Lemkin Institute handled it in the worst way possible.
They did. I used to just be on Twitter all the time, and there were developing stories on Twitter, and so this was my first developing story on Blue Sky that I kind of followed all the way through, just, you know, from seeing the thing published to then seeing all of the negative feedback, let's say.
Yeah.
Let's start with the fact that they've put out a red flag alert rather, which, yeah, that's entirely justifiable, and I believe them calling it, you know, it's paving the way for greater repression is absolutely true, I think.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about it. What they're doing is extremely concerning, particularly if you're an institute for genocide prevention. And all of that stuff is just clearing the road for, I mean, who the hell knows what they're going to do next? And it's looking very, very similar to certain other genocides within the 20th century even. You know the one I mean.
Yeah.
So the fact that they've put a red flag out, good, yes. Someone's calling it as it is. You know, someone is saying we have to be really concerned about this because, yeah, we do. But they fucked it up so much, man.
Yeah, and like you can kind of, or at least I think I can see the point that they were trying to make, but then they made the complete opposite point. It's weird to bring any conversation of misandry into a conversation that's on trans women. If you want to talk about the dehumanization of masculinity that can happen in radical femme and like anti-trans spaces, then we can talk about that, and we should probably talk about it with regards to trans men and not trans women. That's where you really fucked up on that one, my dudes. Like, yeah. Big time.
There was good intentions, but then the execution went very badly.
Yes, indeed. And the fact that they've responded to it not by saying, okay, I see what you're saying. Thank you very much for the correction. You're absolutely right. We should have got somebody trans to look over it. We will correct it immediately. Great. That's how you do accountability, right? But no, they doubled down and said, oh, all this left-on-left violence, it's difficult to see. We're going to leave Blue Sky altogether. It's like, wow. You know, someone, no, hell hath no fury like a cis ally scorned.
Yeah, no, for real. It's very much, you don't like the way that I'm deciding to speak for you? Oh, I'm so upset.
Exactly.
Like, get the fucking memo or get out the fucking room. Like, this isn't... it's infuriating. This next story to talk about is a rough one. I don't really know how to get into it. There's no quippy or funny introduction to this one. The next few stories are going to be talking about Sam Nordquist, Eden Knight, Tahiri Broom, and Eliza Ray Shoup. These are all deaths that have happened in our community. We don't go into any gruesome details, but of course, if you wish to skip past to the point where we're no longer discussing that, if you're just not in a mental space to be able to listen to mourning and a bit of grief, then that's completely understandable. Take care of yourself.
If you are wanting to skip all of that, and I would not blame you if you did, skip to 33 minutes and 29 seconds. We'll see you there.
Now, we will not be going into any gruesome details, but we do have to talk about Sam Nordquist. So Sam Nordquist was a black trans man whose remains were found on February 13th. He had travelled to upstate New York to meet a girlfriend in late September and was due to return after 2 weeks. But when the time came, mid-October, he didn't, and then eventually lost contact with his family in January, who then filed a missing persons report on February 9th. But people known to him and in the area were looking for weeks before that. Sam was described as having a heart of gold who couldn't hurt anybody and being an animal lover by his mother. He worked with disabled people, he was loving. She also said he would give you the shirt off his back. Very kind, loved his family, loved his nieces and nephew, very outgoing, he worked hard. His sister Kayla said that he was a silly person and would never forget the birthdays of her children and loved taking them trick-or-treating. Hundreds of people have turned up to vigils in person or online in the memory of him. Evidence shows that Sam was tortured from December to February before his murder, and that's all of the details that we will be giving in terms of his suffering. Police found that his remains had likely been moved in attempts to cover it up, and so far they've tried to claim that Sam's murder is not a hate crime, as some of the 7 people that have been arrested may also be LGBT. However, that would indicate that cis-queer people are incapable of transphobic violence, or that people would be incapable of committing a hate crime against someone else if lumped into the same category, even if we're talking about 2 totally different kinds of lived experiences. Police have commented on the level of violence too. The captain of New York State Police, Kelly Swift, saying, "In my 20-year law enforcement career, this is one of the most horrific crimes I have ever investigated." But Sam's mother has said that his murder was preventable and has publicly criticised the police for not following up on the 2 wellness checks the family requested for him, one of which was in mid-October when he first failed to return, while the police are insensitively claiming that she is simply confused about which police force she spoke to. Sam had also told local social services himself that he was in danger. Sam's sister also said, "I don't want people to remember him like that. He was beautiful, he was handsome, that's how people should remember him, not what was done to him." And so to respect those wishes, we will close with a brief statement from a friend that knew him, Danny Scott, who said to news outlets, "Before Sam's death, I was not very open about being a trans man, but seeing Sam's story makes me want to be more open. Sam's life mattered, and if there is any type of hate crime, this would be one." I know some people may want to go and look up what specifically was done, or what's been reported. Please, very seriously, do not go looking for details unless you have the strength, especially trans masc and trans men. There's also, on the morning of the day that Sam was reported missing, February 9th, a trans woman called Tahiri Broom was shot and killed in Southfield, Michigan. Now, there is a GoFundMe for funeral costs and services where she has been described by her aunt as brilliant, vibrant, confident. She loved her friends and family, very outgoing, and loved to live life to the fullest. Genuinely one of the sweetest souls you'd ever meet. And she said the same thing that was said about Sam, saying that Tahiri would give anyone the shirt off her back. Funny, smart, like one of those people that can walk into the darkest room and find some light in it. She shined a light that's going to shine forever and ever and ever and ever. She had planned to meet a man there who had contacted her through an advert for sex work. Her assailant had placed 33 calls to sex workers that morning, most of them being black women and trans women. The man in question has been arrested for second-degree murder, felony firearm possession, and carrying concealed weapons charges. The violence is on the rise.
Yeah.
One of the thankful things is there's actual arrests this time.
Yes.
But it's so much not anywhere near enough.
Yeah.
Because justice in a legal system like that is not particularly easy to come by, also.
Yeah, indeed. Particularly not justice for people of colour, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, of course it was a hate crime. What else would it have been?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's something that I just want to touch on with regards to the coverage of Sam Nordquist.
Yeah.
Which is they've used quite a lot of photographs of him like early in transition.
Yeah.
And later on, the photos that have been shared by his family and friends are of this mustachioed, slightly bearded trans man. You know,
Yeah.
he's very definitely on testosterone and he's smiling. He's got so much life behind his eyes. But those aren't the pictures that are being used. They're using the pictures from just after he came out.
Yeah.
When he looks a little, still looks a little bit more femme, let's say. And that kind of like, why are you sharing those pictures?
It doesn't do the same justice as the most recent ones would.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't. And I think it's that thing of, he looks more like a quote unquote trans person, as I think most of the cis journalists will consider, right? At least that's what my immediate thought was when I saw the way in which they were deciding to show photos of him. It's like, you went for the ones where you seem to think he passed the least, and that's really distressing. I mean, there's a whole conversation on passing, and there's a lot of minutiae and nuance within all that, but it's upsetting to not see someone represented the way that they looked when they were most recently here. And what they look like, you know what I mean? And
what they'd be most proud to be looking like.
There is a lot of fuckery with the way in which the media represent missing and murdered people, and the way in which they represent marginalised people at that. So, of course, these two things coalesce into that kind of fuckery.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. There is another death in America that we need to cover. Elisa Ray Shoup, a US veteran who was the first person in the US to gain a gender X marker on a legal documentation. She also recently died by suicide. Elsa was non-binary, but used she/her pronouns, and she was wrapped in a trans flag when she died. Elisa had a fairly public and complicated life, being the first to get that legal recognition of gender. In 2016, she was known as a trans activist and a trailblazer. By 2019, she was a vocal detransitioner, but then she retransitioned in 2022 and came out about that publicly, calling out those who were using her story as support for conversion therapy. She also played a part in the uncovering of emails in 2023 showing large-scale coordination between state representatives and groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom to push anti-trans laws all over the US. She had a wife and child, and a friend called Sue who knew her and said this on a Pittsburgh Lesbians Correspondence blog which commemorated her. "Rest in power, my friend. You did change my life. I hope you would be proud of me. I admire your determination to advocate for the trans community. Your death is devastating. I will miss you forever." Oh, man.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just...
No, it's fine. I was crying when I wrote up both of these. It's so much. When I first heard about the story of Eliza as well, when I first heard about all three of the people we have so far discussed, it hits, but at first we didn't know who Eliza was. We just knew that there was someone who had, completed an attempt, and that really hit. The thing about the trans flag really hits. And the stuff, this is a rough one.
Absolutely heartbreaking.
It is, and it's not an easy thing to write about or, talk about because you just don't know what to say, really.
When, she did leave a note as well, and, we had the question of, do we share some of those words or not? They are available for people that want to find them. We decided to follow the Samaritan's guidelines on how media should report on suicide, which is why we haven't included any. It's fucking rough, and it's really fucking rough.
So there is something I want to talk about in terms of the US news, but let's get through it first, and then we'll talk about that. So,
yeah, unfortunately, there's more tragic news to follow. Some of you may have heard of the tragic story of Eden Knight, a trans woman whose lawyer manipulated Eden into returning to Saudi Arabia with false legal advice and forcibly detransitioning her and isolating her from her friends by telling her to close off her Twitter account, making her life hell, which then led to Eden dying from suicide. Victoria, one of Eden's many friends, told Rolling Stone that she wanted to be a role model and a leader for Saudi trans women. The Rolling Stone article also details a friend called Bailey who housed Eden when she initially came to Georgia. She needed a place to stay, so we let her live with us in our house in Georgia. They tell Rolling Stone Bailey was already living with their young son and spouse, but Knight quickly became part of the family. We shared movies and music. I cooked for her plenty too. My son loved her more than anything. She would play with him and teach him things such as this cute game where he'd run up and hug someone. She said it's a Saudi thing. She cared for them as if they were related. My spouse and I gave her a bracelet with the words "aunt" etched into it. But there has been a development. On the 11th of February, the BBC published a new article naming the lawyer who took her. In this story, the BBC details the journey in which Badr Alamer has taken to take her to Saudi Arabia. In the article, the BBC also approached the Saudi embassy and Badr for a comment, something which received no comment.
One of the first trans protests that I went to was for Eden Knight outside of the Saudi embassy.
Yeah.
When I saw this news, it just kind of took me back there. It was also the first time I saw Sarah Jane Baker speak. Yeah. Fuck's sake, dude. This fucking shit. Sometimes this world is just so cruel.
Yeah. I think that the problem with that lawyer is that I'm not sure he did anything illegal.
That's the awful thing, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
You can see such moral and ethical evil, absolute evil. This is coercive and abusive behaviour. But is it illegal? You know?
Yeah.
And that's also something that, you know, a lot of this story takes place in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
Which can also bring legality to be awkward.
Yeah.
It's just, it's difficult to see how justice can happen here. I hope some form does, but I mean, again, it's that thing of like justice from what system?
Yeah, you know, by who, from who, what does justice even look like?
Exactly. Exactly.
I was quite surprised that the BBC put together an article like this, even as well.
Yeah, BBC haven't been great on trans stuff recently, have they?
No, they've just been laser focused on the other thing. It's just been horrid on their side.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a few stories from different parts of the world. We wanted to highlight, obviously, Britain's not the only place where things are hard. We apologise if those last few stories have brought you down a little bit, because it certainly has for us. But here's something that, rather than getting maudlin about, here's something to get angry about.
Yeah.
Which is much better.
Yeah. Well, it's something to channel that emotion to, I guess. You are probably wishing the media would shut up about this hearing brought upon us all by Sandie Peggie and her cruel, relentless, vindictive campaign to make a trans woman's life hell for just existing. But she won't fife down, so we can't. Especially now that politicians are jumping on the bandwagon. But on Friday the 14th, the tribunal came to a close, and now we wait until July to hear more. And of course, we've had the one tribunal, but, well, turns out there's going to be a second. According to a BBC article, Sandie has been called to another separate disciplinary hearing, this time also including failures of patient care. Now, this is going to sound wild, okay? Pre-context here, it's going to sound wild. But part of the allegations is that when Dr. Upton simply walked into a patient resuscitation room, yes, a room that resuscitates people to keep them alive, Sandie Peggie would just leave. And when Beth went to give information about a patient to Sandie Peggie, Sandie would just straight up ignore her. Literally ignoring vital information needed for someone's care, potentially their life. Now, from what I can see, Sandie Peggie is spiteful and vindictive, which could be dangerous to the people that she is meant to serve and look after. So it is no surprise that Anas Sarwar and the Scottish Labour Party have seen that they have a lot in common and come to Sandie's defence. Because on the 17th of February, in response to this tribunal, Anas Sarwar said that he regretted whipping MPs in favour of the gender recognition reforms in 2023, and that Peggie shouldn't have been taken to a tribunal for refusing to do her job. Because everyone knows that you turning so publicly for the sake of right-wing popularity is a great display of deep convictions and integrity. And just then, when we think that we are done, Faulkner gets in the ring and is given a statement from the EHRC on their involvement, saying, "Today we reminded NHS Fife of their obligation to protect individuals from discrimination and harassment on the basis of protected characteristics including sex, religion or belief, and gender reassignment." They have asked NHS Fife for a copy of, quote, "any equality impact assessment relating to the provision of changing facilities for staff, any information relevant to how such policies have been kept under review, and any details on steps taken to ensure that the rights of different groups are balanced in the application of these policies," before finally throwing in a reference to upcoming guidance in a way that feels threatening considering the EHRC history here. Just saying, that's what I saw. Quote, "This week, media reported on NHS Scotland's forthcoming Guide to Transitioning, which the Scottish Government confirmed has been shared with health boards in preparation for its implementation. It is important that this guide and all guidance, policies and practices which rely on it faithfully reflect and comply with the Equality Act 2010. Like, yeah, sure, but why are you including that here? And we all know that the definition the EHRC has of the Equality Act isn't exactly in full alignment with the spirit of the legislation, shall we say.
I saw her statement and just couldn't stop thinking about, oh my god, it's Kishwa Faulkner with a steel chair!
Yeah, it really is that. It's like, why? Oh my god, it's becoming a Royal Rumble at this point.
Yeah, I mean, remember when this started happening, like maybe on like the first day, it's just going to be another tribunal, nothing big.
Just a tribunal, no big deal.
And then it just fucking became this gigantic circus mess of a thing where the who's who of anti-trans fuckery and the government, outside the government, politicians just coming in to try and have their way in 2 cents, then wall-to-wall coverage on all news media outlets going, oh look, big tribunal where trans people shouldn't exist or something because... And they're trying to put their full weight and support behind this person who... just looks like have you seen the amount of shit she's trying to put Upton through the way they went through the fucking publicly naming her
insisting on misgendering her throughout the entire tribunal.
And
I mean, they're really giving it the full razzle dazzle, like no stone unturned. No fooling about. They've got Richard Gere floating around in a fucking suit. So
hasn't Wes Streeting also weighed in on this as well? Because there was like a whole thing over concerns over if a doctor changes their gender, that their previous faults in their previous gender wouldn't be reflected on their current one or something.
Well, he probably thinks he's walking in like Billy Flynn, but in reality, in a few years, he's going to be like Amos. Sorry, I'm making too many Chicago references now.
I was like, I'll take your word for that one, Flynn.
I got what you were talking about.
That's the John C. Reilly character, Mr. Cellophane.
I only clocked it when you were talking about Richard Gere, the first one, but then the second one I was like, wait, what was that again? But yes, give him the old razzle-dazzle. So this tribunal, thankfully, it's now finished until July. Just the fact that Anas Sarwar has said that she shouldn't have been taken to a tribunal for refusing to do her job. Yeah. Like, if anybody else, in any other set of circumstances, refuses to do their job, they get pulled up, they get put on a disciplinary, and they get fired. Yeah. Because, like, we hired you to do a job and you're not fucking doing it. So either sort yourself out or go and find another job.
Exactly. NHS Fife did exactly what they should have.
Quite.
Yeah, well, yeah, because like this is the thing. It's even in the legal precedent that TERFs love to wave around as if it isn't toilet paper stuck on their shoe. It then only covers the situations where someone has a belief. It doesn't cover actions that you take in accordance with that belief. Like, So it's because I'm pretty sure in that case, the thing that they harked on about was, oh, well, it's now a protected belief. It's like, yeah, but all of the other things that she actually physically did were not covered just because she believed that thing. So the same thing should apply here.
Yeah, bullying is bullying, no matter what you believe.
And also, like, refusal to do your job, like refusal to show a basic level of professional conduct in the face of someone that you disagree with.
Sandie Peggie, they tried to show Sandie Peggie as this, like, whatever, as a hero and all that shit. But then when you look into the details, it just falls apart so quickly, and yet they're putting their full weight behind this person and not just waiting for another tribunal where things might be a bit more ambiguous.
Yeah, she's so unambiguously vindictive, isn't she?
So while Anas Sarwar has, been an idiot, the SNP and the Green Party have come out to say they don't regret trying to pass the Gender Recognition Act. They've put little statements on there saying that their leaders are all proud and so on. So that at least some part of the Scottish Parliament is still standing by it.
Yeah. Some parts of the Scottish Parliament still have some sense. But it just, every time, liberals, in a neoliberal system, the liberals are trying to move to the right to try and court the right-wing voters, and in so doing are betraying everything that they're supposed to stand for. So the leader of Scottish Labour is just trying to court the right, like the Democrats did in America.
Yeah, it worked so well for them. It worked wonderfully for them.
It went really nicely.
Yeah,
went
great
really
tactic.
Nicely.
Because it happened to funnily coincide with reports that polling for Scottish Labour were falling drastically, and then they decided to jump on an anti-trans bandwagon conveniently about the same time to distract away from we're failing to get the polls done.
Yeah, you need to do something.
Although we can't really talk about polls too much, how much we've harked on about it in a previous story.
That's very true, actually. Yeah, probably shouldn't put too much stock in a poll, given what we've said.
True, but it's also I don't know. It's just we have the advantage of time. We have the advantage of seeing how certain tactics play out in a bigger country.
Literally bigger country,
and yet no one
humans.
fucking listens, no one looks, no one goes, oh, am I doing the same thing that these people that failed pretty catastrophically did? Maybe I don't.
It's like a fucking pantomime sometimes, isn't it? He is behind you. No, he isn't.
It's more like lemmings at this point. You will just follow anything if you think that's where a vote will be, and that's not how this fucking works.
Yeah,
anyway,
exactly.
Yeah.
Feels like people should have some principles, but clearly that's too much to
fashion and politics.
Yeah. Well, they do have principles. They have principles of power, principles of profits, and principles of keeping the people that are in power on their good side. It's just principles that aren't in line with the working people.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's fair, but
anyway, all right, moving on.
Speaking of people with principles, in a recent vote at the Unison's Women Conference, we've now found out that they have voted in favour of a motion that states trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary people exist, with no votes against it. The same motion that also said that trans women don't pose a threat to cis women.
Good.
Yeah.
Someone's sticking up for us.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good. I'm glad for it.
It's a bit of an inside tea, this one, from Unison's itself, but also I've also found out recently that the health conference for Unison has invited Wes Streeting into it as well, which has faced some pretty staunch opposition. So I'm keeping an eye on it as things evolve, but at the moment we're hearing the invite is going to be under hostile questioning. Like they're going to be questioning him in a hostile way, but even that feels off anyway, because you're still inviting the literal devil into your conference.
Yeah, villain of the year.
Villain of the year, literally. But so if you're seeing the women's conference, I better put a bit of a contrast on that one, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well,
sorry to put dampeners on everyone's day.
People and organisations contain multitudes, right?
They do. It's hard to know the intentions behind someone inviting Wes Streeting. It could genuinely just be someone who doesn't recognise the level of, issues that trans people have. Like, they might understand the further around it, they may not understand the reasoning. So, I mean, the hostile questioning element sounds good. I'm just so wary of malicious compliance. I'm so wary of malicious compliance from Wes Streeting and this, that, the other, taking opportunities or making opportunities to sort of just entertain us. So you get to say you heard us out and then you do whatever the fuck you want anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's a worry that I can't put into anything realistic right now. It's just a concern that floats up in the air around me like a bird that's got loose.
I mean, he's got previous for that exact thing, hasn't he? He's met with groups and then immediately betrayed them, like literally the next day. Anyway, it's not quite the story, because we started bitching about Wes Streeting again.
Yeah,
which it's just part of a bingo list, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a thing we do. Yeah, we need a new bingo card now because the last one had Kemi Badenoch on it.
She'll pop up again at some point. But yeah, so speaking of Labour being shitty...
Yeah, as we've seen with Labour, they are a bit shit. And as we continue to see the party enshitify itself, we have a new Labour group. Obviously, the Labour Women's Declaration were getting bored. So they decided in a drinking game to form another anti-trans group inside the Labour Party called LGB Labour. A shit version of LGBT Labour, which was already shit to start with, and then decided to make themselves evil as well as shit. So in response to this Poundland LGB alliance, Pride in Labour have said, Pride in Labour exists to champion LGBTQIA+ rights within the Labour Party. We are utterly appalled that a new splinter group, Labour LGB, is seeking to capitalise on the vile transphobia which is so deeply embedded within our society. We'll come back to that. And we will always be extremely clear on this. There is no LGB without the T. We are at an extremely dangerous crossroads where trans people and their right to exist is being brought into question, and we cannot allow this sickening cycle to continue. Be under no illusion, the vast majority of gay, lesbian and bisexual people stand firmly with trans people because they have always been and always will be part of our family. So that's nice, but also,
what are you doing?
Yeah, what is it you're actually doing to ameliorate any of these problems that you're talking about? And saying, capitalising on the vile transphobia which is so deeply embedded within our society that you and yours have actually had a part in propagating. Looking at you, Rosie Duffield.
Yeah.
And they did nothing about her.
Yeah, it seems kind of pointless, to be honest. Like really pointless to set up an LGB alliance group within Labour when Labour already is an LGB alliance group from the way that they are acting.
Yes.
The call is coming from inside the house. You don't need to build another pillow fort. There's enough. Stop. Haven't you got it? You're in the house already. Leave it alone. Why? It just feels like there's been some kind of argument in a group chat somewhere and someone got very upset and decided to make their own special group now. And It just feels really pointless because you've managed to miss the bus on your own trend. Embarrassing, kind of. Well, speaking of watered down LGBAs, let's take a moment to talk about the OG group for a second. And yes, I know, I'm sorry. We got through to some of the nicer stories and you probably thought that we were out of the woods for a second after all of the horrors from before. But let's not forget that losers are still about on the loose and we managed to corner one legally.
Losers Corner.
So we're going to run a little Losers Corner jingle. Except this time it's about the case of wrongful dismissal from the Council of Arts by a woman who resigned after being brought in for disciplinary processes for leaving a supportive comment for trans people on an in-office petition after complaints were made by transphobic work colleagues. Now, if you're on Blue Sky, you'll probably have seen this posted about a few days ago. And if it's in this section, then you'll know that the claimant won her case, which is fantastic. But when I started looking through the court document itself, honestly, it's actually pretty juicy, even a bit, might I dare say, meaty. So stay tuned, because we're going to give you a meal-sized breakdown of this one next time.
Tasty.
Yeah, looks fun.
I tried to not do that thing where I write loads and loads and loads and loads and loads, and I failed a little bit, and then I was like, oh, I'll cut some of this down, it's fine, I'll have added in, and I was like, oh, but actually no, because this bit connects into here and connects into there, and this is really building up a very interesting story.
You made some very good exercising of the cut and paste button.
So that was a fun story to follow, but we'll do a proper breakdown on the next episode, so look forward to that.
Yes.
So now we've caught you up to speed on current events, we can talk about some really cool films and transmedia. Woo! On the 18th of February, it was announced that a film that has covered 2 years of the football team Trans Radio UK will be having its world premiere at the BFI Flair Film Festival in 2025. It's going to be such a really cool film featuring some really cool folks, and hopefully we can get some press accreditation to go and see it at BFI Flair this year.
Yes.
Yeah.
My little fucking absolute filmophile self is very excited about this.
Buzzing.
Oh, it
Looking
is.
forward to
BFI
that.
Flair
Yeah.
is brilliant. We've covered it a few times on this podcast.
We have indeed. Yeah, they kind of just throw press passes at you. It's like, oh, can we get a... Yes, you can! Like, wow, okay. Didn't even finish that question.
This is my first press accreditation for something when I started doing journalism. It's great.
Yeah.
But I am a press.
I look forward to seeing that film because obviously I'm familiar with the work of the team and of Trans Radio UK, who you should check out if you're that way inclined. If you like listening to things and occasionally putting things in your ears of an audible nature, check them out. I mean, presumably you like listening to things because you're listening to this chaotic mess of depression and rage and laughter that this podcast so frequently becomes.
Unless you're reading it, in which case it's probably even more difficult to get through because I have to read our speech and our cadence.
Yeah, we've got all the transcriptions, haven't we? So
We do.
Wonderful transcriptor team who are so good and so hot on it. Like,
Yes, on the case.
following on from that one, a story about another really cool person. A comic book artist named Jenny Blake Isabella, creator of DC's Black Lightning, has recently announced that she is trans in a heartfelt post on her personal website. In the post, Isabella reflected on her first hair appointment and stated that the love and support from her fan base has been overwhelming and deeply appreciated. And in a show of support from DC Comics, they've offered to update her credits for future reprints to reflect her name. And also, she has revealed she is now planning a comic series featuring a trans superhero, which we'll be looking forward to hearing and hopefully reading more about.
Yeah.
fuck yeah. Fuck yeah. Love that. Love that. That's so good.
Yeah, you love to see it, don't you?
Truly. And also, like, how nice to have that offer to reprint. Because, like,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that always kind of bugged me whenever I rewatch The Matrix, is that it won't have them gendered correctly, or it'll have their dead names in.
Yeah, like even
And I'm
on
like,
streaming,
ugh.
they should make the changes anyway, because it's stored on the service. They can just re-edit and pop the right proper.
I can just
thing
twitch. Yeah,
They do it enough times if there's some queer representation that they don't like. Ooh.
Ooh, topical.
But yeah, I suppose if we reflect back onto it, it'll be some great representation when we see that comic series.
Yeah, looking forward to that. All right. So,
Speaking of some more trans literature,
So, I had the absolute honour of speaking to Dee Whitnell last week about their new book coming out, which is Beyond Bananas and Condoms, the inclusive sex education that you never got in school. Very cool. Obviously, a fair few people here will probably know Dee because they, are a content creator in their own right, and they do a lot of work with Queer AF, including doing the 3 Queer Cheers, which we've featured in a couple of times. So it kind of felt like this just works out naturally. You got a book coming out, hey, come over and talk about it. And
Yeah.
it was a really good and interesting time. So here it is now. Ba-boing.
yeah, let's play the tape.
interview.
For any of our listeners that do not already know you, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dee. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a multi-award winning sex educator, content creator, journalist. I currently work as the audience development producer at Queer AF, which I know what the trans knows all about.
Yep.
I am also a author, which is why we're talking today. So I'm the author of Beyond Bananas and Condoms, the LGBTQ plus inclusive sex education book you never got at school. I could go on about many more of my many labels, but I will keep it short and sweet there.
So, I mean, the main reason that we have you here for this interview right now is obviously the book. And you've already mentioned that it's the sex education that you never got at school. Tell us more about that. What kind of stuff is sort of really in it and going through it?
Basically, Beyond Bananas and Condoms is for everyone, really. It's for people that have a good understanding of sex ed, for people who received no sex education at school. It's for trans people, queer people, and cis people, and straight people. Just providing insight into kind of every topic within sex education. My background is a qualified sex educator. I've been delivering sex ed for several years now. So it kind of goes through exactly what the curriculum should be, but isn't, making sure that at every point I talk about how sex education intersects with queer and trans people. So I talk about things like consent, safer sex practices, gender identity, online safety, which is a huge thing at the moment. Basically that.
Just all of it, the whole thing. So you've obviously, if you've mentioned, you've done a lot of work to queer sex education online. And I'm curious what made you want to take this project into a book form versus doing like, videos or other areas that we've seen you more frequently.
Yeah, so originally the reason I decided to write Beyond Bananas and Condoms was because when I was going into schools and teaching sex education, I was teaching resources that didn't reflect me. And I kind of felt like I was lying to students because I was saying things like, oh, women have periods. And then I stood there as a non-binary person and was like, but I'm non-binary and I do.
Yeah.
So I was fed up basically, and I wanted to create a resource for a variety of audiences that they could access sex education at different levels, not only for people who are queer and trans, but people who have queer and trans kids who work with queer and trans people, because they're the people that are, the first port of call when it comes to educating our young people. And if they don't know how to be inclusive, then God knows how the young people are going to know. So I decided to write it instead of kind of do a video series or a podcast. It kind of also was created because I had just finished my master's degree on gender and sexuality, and I did a whole dissertation on the history of trans inclusive sex education within the UK and how shocking it was. And I realized that there was so much to talk about and so many areas that I wanted to fill and wanted to expand and wanted to just rewrite. So I realized that it would take much longer and it needed a dedicated space. And I wanted to make sure that people were able to kind of have this book on them as well, whether it's, in their bedroom or on them as a resource when they're going to teach, to kind of always have that at hand need be. And also I wanted to make it more inclusive and accessible because not everybody enjoys being online, considering all of the headlines, all of the news, all of the meta bans and flags that are happening. So I wanted to create something that people could have without censorship and would be able to filter through and take it at their own pace as well in the comfort of their own home.
That makes a lot of sense. Out of interest, what's one of the most sort of surprising things that you've learned during the process of writing the book? Like, what's one of the factoids that you went, oh my God?
I'm trying to think now off the top of my head. Of course, all of my favorite myths that I love to debunk are trans related, that, non-binary is something that Gen Z created, which I laugh at and I find so hilarious. When in fact it can be traced back to 2000 BCE, and we've known of non-binary and trans identities throughout many cultures, throughout as long as time beyond Western society. But a lot of the myths that really kind of stuck with me were the myths about sex that I fought growing up. For example, somebody can break their fingers if they are pleasuring you and you sneeze. Things like that are topics that I grew up thinking, or that, you'll go into a bush and find a porn magazine. Things like that were really fun myths to debunk, but also myths to kind of explore where they came from and actually the facts behind them, particularly when it comes to porn and safer sex and contraception methods. They were the ones that I giggled at when I was writing, like blue waffle, for example. We've all heard it, we've all come across it. But I loved being like, let's talk about blue waffle and what it actually is. And it is quite nice to kind of look at my younger self and be like, don't worry, you don't have to fear these things. Let's talk about them.
What would you say this book can offer for like the more mature listener who might feel that whilst it's great that like Beyond Bananas exists, they might not have a use for it now, being like a fully grown adult with a sex life and everything?
I'd say that you're always learning, even as a sex educator, even as quote unquote an expert in this space. And I've said this many times, but I'm always learning on the job. We're always learning new things when it comes to sex and how to navigate it, how to be safe online, how to, navigate healthy relationships. They're topics that continue with you throughout your whole life. You don't learn consent one day and then every situation you know exactly what to do. There will be different circumstances that arise. There will be, different places that you're in your life where you may need to look back at, your information, your knowledge, and question it. And particularly for people who are cisgender and straight, questioning their sex education and why it wasn't queer, and reading about queer experiences actually helps you to understand your own experiences better, and also means that you're better prepared to support young people in your lives. And that's an audience that I've been really focused on recently, is parents who are straight and cis who want to talk about sex education to their young people but don't know how to because they only see it through their lens. So even if you think you know your sex education, I think it's so important to understand other people's experiences around sex education, but also we're changing. Now we've got AI impacting the porn industry. There are so many things that are evolving within sex education, also laws and regulations around sex, identity, all of those juicy and terrible things that are happening in America right now and in the UK in regards to trans people. So I think sex education is always growing. And one point I say in the book is that I don't want this to be your only resource. I want you to go out and look for other resources. And if you don't see yourself in a resource, create it, write it yourself, because that's why I wrote it. I didn't see myself, and there were no resources out there that reflected my unique experience. So I created a book that hopefully will touch as many people as possible. But if there are moments where you think, what about me? What about my experience? I so push people to create their own, because you won't be the only person experiencing that. And it's so important to get your voice out there as well. So I'm very much, this isn't the one-stop book. I want everyone to kind of use it as a jump pad and a place that they can go back to and refer to, but also reach out and find their own resources that suit them best as well.
That's brilliant. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, the kind of difference in knowledge that I feel like you get opened up to when you start, as a trans person, as a queer person, when you start realizing that and living in accordance with that, you will often realize that you may think that you know everything when you consider yourself a cis but then the second that you like go outside there, oh, there's whole worlds, whole magnitudes I had no idea on. I guess on the point of transness, specifically us being a trans podcast, what do you feel, and this isn't necessarily book related, but what do you feel is one of the most pressing issues regarding trans sexual education and health that doesn't get spoken about?
One topic that I did mention quite a bit in the book that was heavily inspired by my trans partner was the second puberty that trans people experience, and how so many people don't explore that. I think when we learn about puberty growing up, we're told, oh, you're going to feel uncomfortable in your body. You're not going to like yourself. You're going to smell. You're going to grow new hair. You're not going to feel comfortable. But no one tells you that might continue on in life, and that actually may be a sign of you questioning your gender, questioning your body, questioning what makes you feel comfortable in yourself. We kind of tell young people, oh, it'll get better one day. And then trans and queer people are sat there going, no, it still isn't better. So what do I do? And one thing that I really loved exploring was the trans second puberty, and kind of what it means to be a trans young person, and how you can navigate your transness pre-medical transition, but also post-medical transition, which is a topic in schools that, from my experience of teaching in schools, is not in schools at all. They will not touch that, particularly right now. So being able to talk about that experience allowed me also to kind of heal those kind of memories of myself questioning my gender identity and not knowing what it meant, and just being told, oh, it's puberty. You don't like your chest because it's growing, not because I actually don't like my chest at all. And not knowing, okay, but I can bind. There are ways to navigate these feelings of dysphoria. I don't have to just deal with it. And that's something that I wish was spoken more about in the curriculum in schools. But of course, if it was, they would say that it was us pushing the agenda of being trans, when in reality, you can't make people trans. You can teach them and give them the tools to understand it. And if it clicks, and that's great. That's definitely a part of sex education that I personally missed out on. And I know so many other trans people missed out on. And unfortunately, our young people are still missing out on because of censorship when it comes to trans identities in schools, which is getting worse, just to be honest.
It's wild to think that it's getting worse, but like we didn't have the same level of literal government guidance towards censorship than, like, I was at school post Section 28, but in that weird period where they still didn't fucking change anything. They didn't say anything different. They didn't start. They just were allowed to if they wanted to. So the first time I ever learned about trans people in an educational setting outside of, say, movies that you see and whatnot, where you know you're in an entertainment media landscape, the first time I learned about trans people in a educational sense was psychology A level, where we covered David Rayner.
Yep, I did that. I was psychology.
Yeah. And what a way to first have a conception of what trans people,
when I was in that class and learning about that, and it sits with me. I remember telling my boyfriend recently because he didn't know about it, and when I told him, he was shocked. And I was like, I was told this at school during a period of my time where I didn't know who I was and what I was. And I remember my teacher just being so like, yeah, here's this study about this really awful situation, about this really like awful scenario. And by the way, it doesn't end happily either. Enjoy. And that was it. And that's all I got for trans people. And you know, I am grateful that when I do go into schools now, particularly during LGBTQ plus History Month, I am being brought into schools to talk about my trans experience. But there is still this level of they have to wait until a certain age. And there's definitely not enough of trans joy in schools and in stories. And I'm so glad we had that same experience, because that's just brought back so many memories of that A level. A-level course. Oh my God.
It's something that I only realized literally a couple of days ago when I was having a conversation with my dad about trans stuff in general, and I was like, actually, I've just read. Do you want to know the first time I heard about trans person? And he went, "Oh God."
My heart for that experience. I'd be interested to know how they teach it now, and kind of the people in the class and how they react, because there would be such a difference. Because from going into schools, young people know so much more than teachers. They are the teachers in the room when they are trans and queer. So I would love to see how they teach it now and how young people respond to it. Because I know in my class, no one really. We just kind of continued on because we didn't really know what to say. But I feel like now young people would be like, hey, hang on, there's a lot to unpack here. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, like I feel like I was quite lucky in the fact that my teacher basically, she very clearly had a lot of sympathy. And you could kind of, it was one of the few times I remember her getting a little bit kind of like, this is going to be a tough one to talk about, and I might get a little bit of a waver in my voice, but it's because this is real. I remember it being taught to us with the sort of takeaway conclusion that gender is not solely a societal construct. There is some inner compass that lets you know who you are and where you stand. But I feel like, again, I really lucked out on having a very compassionate teacher that cared a lot about how we frame people and how we frame patients and illness. And I think that that's likely not going to be standard. And oh, for any listeners who do not know, maybe be careful when Googling David Rayner. It's a very sad story, but functionally what happened is a child was born, and following, I believe, a mishap with some surgery as a baby, a psychologist who was doing a lot of work into how societally constructed gender is decided that it would be best to advise the parents to raise the child as a girl, despite being born assigned male at birth, because if gender is societal, then they won't know the difference. And surprise, surprise, he did know the difference, and he eventually spent his whole life trying to get back to going through a trans experience, but in a very particularly different kind of way and setting from us. Speaking of transes and trans kids, you've mentioned you're the founder of Trans Kids Deserve to Grow Up. So obviously you've been at protests, but I really wanted to ask you, because you are part of the first ever all trans panel in Parliament, and I'm really curious what that experience was like.
I was terrified, if I'm honest, to be a trans person in Parliament. I remember making the joke of saying to my partner, "I wonder if I'm the first person to wear a binder in this room." And that was
Mm.
a really fun thing. And I was like, "Oh, that might be fun to know." Um, it was it was definitely heavy. I remember us going in and we obviously all had our speeches ready. My speech was primarily talking about Corey Hall, the young trans individual that we lost sadly, a few years back now,
Mm.
because of bullying and discrimination. And I'm really close with Corey Hall's family, and they allowed me to talk about him in Parliament. And I've met his family, absolutely amazing family, love them so much. So I was able
Mm.
to share some of his moments and just humanize him to this room, because they had heard his name and they'd heard his story, but they didn't know things like, oh, he loved Doctor Who, he loved
Mm.
giraffes, the color yellow. And I just wanted to remind people that we're talking about kids here, we're talking about young people. And this phrase of, throwing trans on them then puts certain ideas into politicians and individuals' minds, but they are young people. And it was really moving. Everybody who attended, they delivered these amazing speeches. And I did cry several times because they were so emotive and the room was dead quiet. Everyone was listening. And the questions that followed, the politicians generally really did want to hear, what we want from them. And that was something I didn't expect. I didn't expect them to say, we need more of these stories. We need you to tell us directly what impact we're having. And you're seeing that
Mm.
now with Trans Kids Deserve Better and their protests. You're seeing them tell politicians directly and unapologetically, this is what I want. And I think that is such a jump from where we were a few years back. And it's amazing to see from when I started my campaign to now trans kids deserve better, and what they're doing outside West Streeton's office. I'm so happy that they're being so vocal, because that's what the politicians told us to our faces, that they want to know the stories of these people, because they
Yeah.
only really read the name, the age that they died, why they died. They don't know their experiences. Yeah, it was a moving session, and I remember leaving it feeling very hopeful, which now when I look back brings me some feelings of, okay, why didn't you listen then, and why are we still here, and why are we still talking? Because everyone in that room was emotive. Everybody had such feeling. The night felt so amazing. And now I look back and I'm like, where are those people? Where is that feeling of solidarity and of we have to do something? Where is that now? Where has that vanished? Because these people are still in Parliament in different positions, maybe, but they're still there. So
Mm.
why aren't we seeing them being more vocal now? But that's something we could unpack for hours.
It does feel like at this point, when trans people get in front of people in a official capacity,
Mhm.
it seems like it tends to lead more towards them being able to say they've checked the box of saying they've spoken to us
Yeah.
sometimes. And it's like that makes it really difficult to then want to sit down in a room and continue
Mhm.
that conversation. Looking back at what's changed, like
Mhm.
since the start of Trans Kids Deserve Grow Up, as you mentioned, things generally in the landscape have kind of gotten worse. I'm really
Yeah.
curious on what your perspective is and how, or what do you see as important for getting us through this particularly scary and yet scarily not unprecedented times.
In my heart, I just want to center trans young people's voices and putting them front of center when it's safe to do so. And if it's not safe to do so, being a vessel for them to be able to share their stories. Because as I said,
Mm.
sharing stories is so important, and it humanizes us. It moves us beyond labels and shows people that we are just people, and that we're not these scary ideas of what trans kids are being projected to be. So
Mm.
ensuring that their voices are heard and putting their voices forward is so important. But I also respect that it's so tiring to have to keep explaining who you are and sharing your story. And it's not safe for many young people to do that. Again, that's why I enjoy my campaign and being able to be that vessel to speak up for individuals like Corey Hall and his family, being able to kind of take the brunt of the hate, because I don't mind that as a trans adult. And
Mm.
going on to being a trans adult, it's so important that trans adults stand up for their trans young people, and that
Mm.
they share their stories and share how they went from a young person who was confused and questioning to a trans adult, and how that journey took place, and really just telling it straight and highlighting the fact that it isn't as easy as everybody thinks it is. It's not as cheap as everybody thinks it is. You don't go to a GP being told, oh, you're trans, well done, go and get your surgery now. And just rationalizing it and making people realize the reality of it. Because when people don't understand something, that's when they start to elaborate and make it fantastical. But the reality is like people like me and my partner, we can't afford top surgery and we're adults. Like it takes a process. It's not something that comes easy. Another element that comes into that is community. Recently, I've experienced personally so much infighting from the trans community ever since I came out as non-binary and then started using the trans label as well. I've faced a lot of infighting, and right now we don't need infighting and we don't have time for it. We need to stand together because, as many have said, once they attack one part of our community, it's a trickle-down effect and they will attack other members of the community. And we're seeing that happen in America. We're seeing that happen in the UK. Once they come for the T and the Q, they're gonna come for the LGB. That's just something that will happen. So it's so important that if you are gay, if you are bi, if you are a lesbian, that you do stand up for your trans young people and trans people in general and non-binary people, and you fight for their rights and you share their stories. Because obviously when you look through every kind of identity, there is levels of privilege depending on who you are, where you come from, your background, various other elements. So using your privilege is so important as a queer person to uplift members of the community that are marginalized, who can't share their stories, who can't share their stories because they're not here anymore, because they don't feel safe to, because they're just not able to. That's kind of like a bigger a kind of a roundup of what we can do as a community. I always want to make sure that I include cis and straight people in the conversation. It's about educating yourself and talking with trans people and realizing that we're just people, and being able to kind of challenge your own beliefs and also challenge any kind of clickbaity headlines and articles that you see, because most of the time they're not real. So if you see something and you're like, oh my God, this is so wild and fantastical, maybe take a step back and consider who wrote it, where's the proof, what's the context, and then it might start to unravel. That's something that I'm really keen on sharing recently, since we've seen an influx of people saying people are identifying as cats in schools now. They're putting litter boxes everywhere, and it's like, that's not true. Let's please.
That's not true. And also, in reality, the reason why there's a device that's similar enough like that in a school is because of a horrific problem with gun violence. So if you want no litter boxes in your schools, pass some gun control. I think there's also a lot in the way in how cis people listen to us. That's also a thing. I think a lot of times cis people will, even if they're genuinely wanting to listen and learn and understand, they'll kind of be approaching it from a conversation as if, I know a little bit less, but I have opinions, and we're having a conversation as equals. And I think that there is a lot of reward to be gotten from recognizing that you are not an expert and that the person before you has a lived experience. That means that you aren't equals in this scenario. Actually, you're in a position of learning from someone who has gone through a lot more and who you should maybe defer a little bit to in this particular area, depending upon what and how, right? Because that's the way that I at least like to try and show up when someone's speaking to me about a life experience that I know I have nothing to, no connection to. I'm going to respect the fact that they're the expert. But yeah, it's been wonderful and lovely chatting to you. I've got no more questions. If there's any kind of questions you have or any kind of discussion points that you want to bring up, oh, there's this cool thing, then feel free. Any kind of plugs you want to make?
I will go straight into the plugs then. So if you would like to hear more about my campaign, Trans Kids Deserve to Grow Up, you can find it on Instagram at Trans Kids Deserve to Grow Up, and also hashtag Trans Kids Deserve to Grow Up. I am going to be relaunching my photo campaign where I share pictures of trans adults as babies, and they share a lovely statement. So if you have any, please do send them my way. I would love to share your stories and share your lovely young people photos. If you'd like to learn more about gender and sex and identity, and also trans news as well, you can head over to my work Instagram, which is at Sex Fury with Dee. The E in sex is a free because Meta hates anything to do with sex and queerness. So, yep.
Yeah.
And then you can check out my book, Beyond Bananas and Condoms, which by the time this pod is out will probably be published on the 21st of Feb, or you can pre-order it. Either way, it'll be somewhere for you to get it. And I have a few launches happening in London and in Brighton. But as a socially anxious person that I am, you don't have to come along to that. It's fine.
I think I met you at London Trans Pride briefly. When I was taking when I was taking photos of all of the signs that I could, because that's what we were doing for What the Trans. I remember at one point briefly bumping into, I think, you and Jamie, queer AF people, and being like, "Oh, Trans History Week alumni, hi, bye," and then I had to run. But
yeah, I think you actually took the picture that we've been using for our crowdfunder. It's me and Jamie.
Oh, possibly.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
I love that photo. It's really lovely, actually. I love What the Trans. I've been, working with you since you kind of were born, and since I kind of started my campaign as well. Love the journalism that you do as well, and the fact you don't give a shit. Love that.
Yeah, someone's got to not.
Right? We need trans people who are loud and don't give a shit.
Yeah, loud and disruptive.
So that was good. Nice conversation. Well done.
Thank you. I mean, I was only half of it, so But the thing that got really interesting, we both ended up it's the moment where we're talking about David Rayner. Obviously, as I mentioned in the interview, David Rayner was the first time that I had been taught in school of someone having what could be considered to be a transgender experience. And, there's a lot in that I think is to be explored. There's a lot in the way that David Rayner was treated that I feel some kind of recognition and sympathy with, including the fact of the level of pathologization that he had in his life, which is so much, and also the fact of what was done to him as such a young child is something that a lot of intersex people go through still to this day.
Yes. Yes.
So it was kind of a random veer off left course, but it's a topic that I really want to think more on and consider more on. Maybe do some kind of retrospective re-examining of that, and also the way in which we are taught about his life. But yeah, on the book, I'm genuinely really, really excited for this book. We found out literally today on day of recording, it's currently number 2 on the Amazon bestsellers list for,
nice.
I think for the topic of transgender people.
It was for bestsellers for under transgender sex.
Amazing. So we love to see that, and this is great, and this is something that me and many of my friends have often lamented at the way in which, the best sex education that you were likely to get in school is when it was kind of funny, because if it wasn't kind of funny, it was going to be excruciatingly awkward, if not deeply uncomfortable.
Oh, yes.
This feels like the world has been set ever so slightly more into a good kind of balance, and yeah, excited for what they do next.
Yes, always great to hear from Dee, and always great to have them on the pod.
Yeah, lovely to hear from them. So, and in speaking of things that are lovely,
Yes,
let's do some trans joy. Woo! All right, so on Trans Day of Visibility at the end of March, there is to be a reading at Quill in sunny Scotland. In fact, in Edinburgh, on Leith Walk in Edinburgh. You just need to sign up for it over Eventbrite. It's £6.
Good value.
yeah.
It's described as a cosy evening of powerful readings celebrating Trans Day of Visibility, which sounds pretty awesome. That's at Argonaut Books in Edinburgh. So yeah, check it out if you can.
Speaking of things to check out, there's a crowdfunder for a trans sci-fi short film that Tilly Bridges is co-wrote and co-directing. She's really excited about it. It's a story about love and hope and connection, and it's a story that we need more of now than ever. So check that out if you want to support some great films like that, because it's always great to have some trans sci-fi films. That's something that'd be really cool.
And if you've got something that is joyful, that brings you something good in your life, something you're looking forward to, something you've achieved, something you're about to start doing, anything that sparks joy, let us know and we will read out your contribution here on the Showdy. That's it. Thank you all. Thanks for listening. Obviously, you can find us at whatthetrans.com. That's where all of our stuff goes. As we've said, there's those 2 really good articles that we've had out just this week. Obviously, you can find us on Blue Sky. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram, although for how much longer, I do not know. And if you feel like this inane rambling is the sort of thing you can financially support, then please do head on over to our Patreon. And finally, we're at 101 subscribers. Oh yeah! Victory noises.
Woo!
Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye. This episode of What the Trans was written, produced and presented by Ashleigh, Alyx and Flint, and co-written by Sammy. It was edited by Amber Roberts and Amber Devereaux, with music composed by Waritsara Yui Karlberg. Our episode thumbnail artwork is by Upoa Beers, and transcription performed by Sam Wyman, Rowan B, Rachel Aldred, Georgia Griffiths and Becky. And we would especially like to thank our 101 Patreon producers, who are Bex the Mermaid,
Brian Goss. Oh. Hazel Dust.
Basic B Laura,
Becky Cheetle,
MX Spectrum.
Jordan Starr,
Lee Downs,
Lindsay Cannon.
George Simmons,
Carly Silvers,
B Squared.
Smiley, friend of Candir from across the pond,
the Socialist Party of Great Britain 1904,
Sarah.
Eris,
Tin Roof,
Naystrom.
Lex Phoenix,
Sebastian Singh Soprano.
Joe, the NB is valid. Yes, you are. Go,
yeah,
Joe.
you are,
Yes.
Andrea Brooks,
Jack Edwards,
Stefan Blakemore.
Now Art,
Needles and Threads,
Flaming Daphne.
Dr. McGee,
Jen,
Janeway.
Katie Reynolds,
Georgia Holden Burnett,
Grabalicious.
Mux Afon,
Route -1,
Grey.
Elizabeth Anderson,
Bernice Roust,
Ellen Meller.
Jay Hoskins,
Trowan,
Ashley.
Setcap,
Jane,
Roberto Duprunk.
Rose Absolute,
Sarah,
Cena.
Kiki T,
D,
Sky Kalayan.
Eric Widman,
B,
Jude.
Monsieur Squirrel,
Fergus Evans,
Anubis a Jackal.
Brandon Craig,
Break the System,
Sean Phillips.
Heidi Reardon,
Lenzel,
Clara Volumi.
Amelia,
Samantha Raven,
Ravenheart, bringer of the heavy metal.
Tabitha Joe Cox, aka Candy,
Fiona McDonnell,
Murgatroyd.
Ontologically Unjust,
Stella,
Cindergoza.
Rebecca Prentice,
Crazy Richard,
Dan Oblivion.
Florence Stanley,
Helen,
Underscore. L.
Underscore.
Hollingsworth.
Melody Nix,
Fiona Punchard,
John.
CB Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Ted Delphos.
Kai Lewin,
Vic Parsons,
Patreon user.
Vic Kelly,
Catherine,
Sabrina McVeigh.
Cassius Adair,
Melissa Brooks,
Karakan 12.
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly.
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Pena,
Lauren Irons.
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean.
and Lena's. Thank you everyone for watching.
Thank
Thanks so
you
much.
all.
Thank you. Oh my god, bye. Bye. Tell your pets I love them.
And now we've caught you up on speed. Now we've
We've caught you up on speed. Who's giving out speed in the What the Trans offices, Alex? Who? And is it on prescription?
I shall.
That sounds amazing, Alex. I've not had speed for years.
I'm not going to comment on my dealer.